On February 22nd, 2026, the most wanted man in the Western Hemisphere was killed in a joint United States and Mexican operation. El Mencho, founder of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, was gone. Every precedent said what comes next: fragmentation, faction wars, collapse. That is what happened after Escobar, after Cardenas, after El Chapo. But weeks passed, and CJNG's drug pipelines kept flowing. Its fuel theft networks kept pumping. Its extortion rackets kept collecting. The power vacuum everyone predicted never opened. So if the most dangerous cartel in Mexico does not need its king, who actually holds power, and what does that reveal about every billion-dollar strategy built on hunting down one man? Every major cartel takedown in the last 40 years has leaned on a single idea: cut off the head and the body dies. This is the doctrine known as the kingpin strategy. It is not just a catchy phrase. It is official policy, spelled out in US and Mexican government playbooks. The theory is simple. Remove the top boss, and the criminal empire will fracture, lose its nerve, and eventually collapse under the weight of its own confusion. In practice, that means military raids, extradition orders, and multi-million-dollar bounties, all aimed at a single name on the most wanted list. The kingpin strategy is built on the assumption that cartels are like mafia families, tight-knit, hierarchical, and dependent on the authority of one patriarch. It is the same logic that sent Colombian commandos after Pablo Escobar in 1993, and that justified the relentless pursuit of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman through the tunnels of Sinaloa. Official policy documents from both sides of the border spell it out. The removal of a cartel leader is supposed to trigger chaos within the organization, disrupt supply chains, and give law enforcement a window to dismantle what is left. U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, for example, calls for sanctions targeting the leadership, command structure, and financial backbone of transnational criminal organizations. The DEA National Drug Threat Assessment echoes the same line. Take out the head, and the rest will fall. It is a strategy with a clear, measurable goal. Agencies expect that by removing a single figure, they can create a power vacuum. That, in turn, should lead to infighting, fragmentation, and a drop in the group's ability to move drugs, launder money, or corrupt officials. The kingpin strategy is not just about stopping one person. It is about breaking the economic engine that keeps a cartel alive. In theory, it is the difference between shutting down a family-run restaurant by arresting the owner and watching the rest of the staff scatter when the doors close. But here is what no headline told you. The kingpin strategy assumes that the cartel's structure is rigid, top-down, and irreplaceable. It assumes the boss is the glue that holds the whole machine together. That is why every policy memo, every press conference, and every military operation hammers home the same message: take out the king and the kingdom crumbles. This is the logic that has shaped anti-cartel policy for decades. To understand why that logic failed in the case of CJNG, you have to look at what the doctrine leaves out, and what happens when a criminal empire is built less like a family and more like a franchise. December 2nd, 1993, Medellin, Colombia. Pablo Escobar, the world's most wanted drug lord, is cornered and killed on a rooftop. Within hours, news of his death spreads across the globe, but the victory is short-lived. The Medellin cartel, once the most feared criminal syndicate in the Americas, collapses almost overnight. In the vacuum, rival outfits, the Cali cartel and Norte del Valle, move in. Homicide rates in Colombia, already staggering, double in just 2 years. The country's murder rate jumps from 21 per 100,000 in 1993 to 46 per 100,000 by 1995. Instead of peace, Escobar's fall unleashes a wave of fragmentation and turf wars, scattering power across dozens of smaller, more volatile groups. March 24, 2003. Matamoros, Tamaulipas. Mexican Marines capture Ociel Cardenas Guillen, the Gulf Cartel's iron-fisted boss, after a brief but bloody shootout. The arrest is hailed as a tactical triumph. But inside the Gulf Cartel, the old order crumbles. Los Zetas, once the cartel's paramilitary wing, break away and declare war on their former masters. The result is a brutal, years-long conflict that turns Tamaulipas into a battlefield. Cartel-related deaths in the state skyrocket from around 250 in 2003 to more than 2,200 by 2008. The split gives birth to a new kind of criminal organization, better armed, more ruthless, and even less predictable. January 8, 2017. Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the elusive Sinaloa kingpin, is extradited to the United States. The world's most famous drug trafficker is finally behind bars. But the Sinaloa cartel does not collapse. Instead, it fractures. Factions loyal to El Chapo's sons, Los Chapitos, clash with those following Ismael El Mayo Zambada. The violence is immediate and widespread. Sinaloa's homicide rate jumps 23% over the next 3 years. Nationally, Mexico's murder rate climbs from 23.5 per 100,000 in 2016 to 26.4 per 100,000 in 2019. The cartel's legendary unity dissolves into a patchwork of warring bands, each fighting for a piece of the old empire. Over and over, history delivers the same verdict. Remove the kingpin, and the criminal machine doesn't stop. It shatters. The fragments fight, the body count rises, and the business of drugs, extortion, and kidnapping rolls on under new management. These are not just stories of fallen bosses. They are cautionary tales written in blood and statistics, each one reinforcing the orthodoxy that the kingpin strategy works, at least in the short term. For decades, this pattern has shaped every major cartel takedown from Colombia to Mexico. But what if the next cartel is built to survive the loss of its king? CJNG's survival does not depend on a single boss, but on 5 core services, each one a pillar holding up the cartel's business model. These services operate like the gears of a machine, each with its own specialists and contracts, binding regional operators to the central hub. The 5 services are what keep the organization intact. First is capital. Money moves through laundromats, retail fronts, and digital currencies, never sitting still. In 2024, a Mexican national admitted to laundering $1.5 million for CJNG through an OXXO convenience store franchise. That same year, a former DEA finance official was indicted for agreeing to launder $12 million, funneling cartel funds through a Los Angeles crypto exchange and into Puerto Vallarta real estate. These are not isolated incidents. They are part of a system built to hide profits and keep the cash flowing. Capital is the fuel. Second is precursor supply. Synthetic drugs require chemicals, and CJNG's supply chain is global. The 2024 National Drug Threat Assessment notes CJNG's reliance on Chinese chemical and pill press companies for fentanyl and methamphetamine precursors. Customs manifests from 2025 show containers arriving at Manzanillo, packed with chemicals like N-phenyl-2-pyrrolidone. U.S. seizures barely slow the flow. The logistics are that robust. Supply underpins production. Third is smuggling infrastructure. CJNG controls ports like Manzanillo and Veracruz, key trucking unions, and even oil pipelines. In May 2025, OFAC sanctioned logistics firms linked to CJNG's operations at Manzanillo, naming front companies that filed bills of lading for fentanyl precursors. In 2024, a logistics coordinator was convicted for moving falsified tankers of stolen crude from Tamaulipas to the U.S. Gulf Coast. Each node is a profit center, and the network adapts if one is hit. Infrastructure is the backbone. Fourth is brand recognition. The CJNG name is more than intimidation. It acts like a franchise. The blue and white insignia, Jalisco slogans, and even timeshare resorts like Cave Gardens all serve to legitimize criminal business. In May 2025, OFAC sanctioned Cave Gardens for laundering cartel proceeds and luring tourists into trafficking schemes. Regional operators pay for the brand, just as a franchisee pays for a logo. Brand gives scale and trust. Fifth is corruption networks. Bribery runs through every layer: municipal officials, police, customs, even Pemex. In Tamaulipas, Pemex insiders falsify pipeline reports, letting oil thieves siphon millions. Corruption is not a byproduct. It is a service sold as part of the package. Corruption greases every interaction. Contracts, not loyalty, bind these operators. The 5 services keep the cartel running, even when leadership changes. Contracts, not blood ties, hold CJNG together. Picture a cartel cell in Veracruz. The local boss does not just pledge loyalty to a distant figurehead. Instead, he signs onto a revenue-sharing agreement, sometimes written, sometimes sealed with a handshake and an encrypted message. The deal is simple. Pay a fixed percentage of your local profits back to the central hub, and in return, you get access to the 5 corporate services that keep the business running. This is not old-school mafia tribute. It is more like a franchise royalty. In some regions, that cut runs as high as 15%, wired through layers of shell companies or funneled via cryptocurrency mixers. If one regional manager falls, the contract and the payment stream remain. Redundancy is built into every layer. CJNG does not rely on a single port, pipeline, or accountant. If authorities freeze a logistics firm in Manzanillo, another in Veracruz takes up the slack. When a money laundering front in Los Angeles collapses, new cash flows open through real estate in Puerto Vallarta or retail chains in Monterrey. The franchise network is designed to absorb shocks. No single node is indispensable. That is why U.S. Treasury sanctions in May 2025 targeted 5 leaders and 17 companies, yet shipments and payments barely slowed. Professional knowledge is not stored in the head of one boss. It is distributed among specialized units. Former customs officials manage import paperwork for precursor chemicals. Ex-bankers run laundering operations, moving millions through legitimate businesses. When a key player is arrested or killed, the technical know-how stays with the corporate team. The loss of a single leader does not erase the expertise needed to keep the machine humming. Brand. Loyalty replaces personal loyalty. The CJNG name is a badge of protection and a license to operate. Regional cells pay for the right to use the blue and white insignia, just as a fast food franchisee pays for golden arches. That brand brings instant recognition, market access, and the threat of retaliation against rivals or defectors. Operators do not need to know the boss. They need the brand and the services behind it. This is why, weeks after El Mencho's death, shipments of fentanyl precursors still arrived in Manzanillo. Oil theft in Tamaulipas continued, and extortion rackets in Michoacan kept collecting. The franchise model's contracts, redundant nodes, professional knowledge transfer, and brand-driven incentives keep the business alive, no matter who sits at the top. The organization is built to survive decapitation, not just endure it. The next story is not about who takes over. It is about how the machine keeps running, powered by systems that outlast any single name. A single pipeline runs through the flatlands of Tamaulipas, carrying crude oil from Pemex fields toward the U.S. border. At night, the hum of siphoning pumps and the glare of floodlights reveal the real business of Cesar El Primito Morfin. He is not a household name, but his operation is the engine behind one of the most lucrative rackets of CJNG, pipeline piracy. El Primito started as a lieutenant for the Gulf Cartel, but in 2024 he defected, bringing with him a crew of seasoned oil thieves and a Rolodex of corrupt Pemex engineers. The draw was not just the promise of more territory. It was the CJNG franchise model, a contract, not a handshake, that guaranteed capital advances, protection, and a cut of the profits, all in exchange for a monthly royalty wired through a maze of shell companies. The arrangement was simple. El Primito ran his own crew, sourced his own buyers, and kept the pipeline flowing. In return, he paid the central CJNG finance hub, just like a franchise fee. The numbers are staggering. According to a 2024 DEA logistics brief, Morfin's network siphoned off tens of millions of dollars worth of crude every month. U.S. court records, specifically the indictment of the Jensen brothers in the Southern District of Texas, detail how the stolen oil crossed the border disguised as legitimate product. Falsified customs manifests listed the crude as coming from authorized Pemex shipments, but the barrels had been tapped miles upstream, long before reaching the official loading point. The Jensen family, based in Houston, handled the laundering on the U.S. side, selling the oil to refineries and wiring proceeds back to Mexico. The indictment ties at least 30,000 barrels a month, valued at $12 to $15 million, to CJNG-controlled shipments. None of this would work without the second half of the franchise package: corruption as a service. Pemex insiders falsified pipeline integrity reports, tipping off Morfin's crew to inspection schedules and repair outages. Customs officials at the border received monthly envelopes, or in some cases, crypto transfers routed through mixers flagged by FINCEN. When a local police chief in Reynosa threatened to investigate, he was quietly paid off and then rotated to a different post. The whole operation ran like a shadow logistics company, complete with payroll, accounting software, and a compliance department. Except the compliance was enforced by armed enforcers, not HR. The franchise model insulated El Primito from the chaos that usually follows a kingpin's death. When El Mencho was killed in February 2026, the Tamaulipas oil taps did not slow. The contracts remained, the bribes kept flowing, and the crude kept moving north. Even as headlines speculated about a CJNG collapse, monthly revenue from Tamaulipas stayed in the tens of millions. In the words of a former DEA analyst, if you want to cripple Air CJNG, you do not chase the boss, you freeze the service contract. The Jensen indictment lays out the blueprint: cross-border manifests, shell company transfers, and encrypted chats between Morfin's lieutenants and Houston-based buyers. The paperwork reads less like a criminal conspiracy and more like a multinational franchise agreement. Each side knows its role, each payment triggers a service, and the risk is distributed across the network. The oil keeps flowing, the money keeps moving, and no single arrest or assassination can break the chain. Pipeline piracy in Tamaulipas is not just a story of stolen oil. It is a case study in how capital and corruption, delivered as services, allow a cartel franchise to outlast its founder. The next franchisee in line does not need to inherit loyalty. He just needs to sign the contract, grease the right palms, and keep the crude moving. The machine runs on systems, not on names. A Friday night in Playa del Carmen. Neon spills across the sidewalk. The bass from a rooftop club rattles the glass, and the line for the bathrooms is longer than the line for the bar. None of these tourists know the name Emilio. Alejandro Danone Hernandez. But every pill, every baggie, every gram that changes hands in this nightlife circuit once passed through his cell. On December 6, 2025, police pulled over Danone's car on a highway outside Cancun. The trunk held vacuum-sealed marijuana, a pistol, and a stack of cash. By sunrise, his arrest ricocheted through WhatsApp groups and police bulletins. For a moment, it looked like the Deltas, the CJNG Riviera Maya branch, had lost their anchor. But here's what no headline told you. The party didn't stop. Within days, the same clubs saw the same product, delivered by new faces. The Delta's cell simply swapped out one manager for another. State police seized Danone's phone, but the logistics, the encrypted chats, the drop points, the payment splits, kept humming. In the weeks after his arrest, naval patrols intercepted 3 small boats running from Isla Mujeres to Playa del Carmen, each carrying kilos of cocaine and MDMA, shrink-wrapped and waterproofed, bound for the beachfront bars. These were not deep-water drug submarines or million-dollar yachts. They were 6-meter fiberglass launches, running micro routes between the islands and the mainland, docking at hidden piers behind resorts. The product still arrived on schedule. The clubs still paid their cut. The brand, the blue and white CJNG insignia, never vanished from the packages. The cell's resilience was not luck, it was design. The Deltas operate under a franchise contract, not a blood oath. Each regional manager gets the right to use the CJNG name, access capital for bribes and losses, and tap into the cartel's maritime logistics. In return, they wire a fixed percentage of profits, sometimes as much as 15%, back to the central finance hub in Jalisco. When Danone went down, the contract did not dissolve. The next in line stepped up, the same way a franchisee replaces a store manager. The supply chain, the payment system, the brand protection, they are all services, not favors. The Deltas do not need to know who sits at the top. They need the infrastructure to keep the product moving and the cash flowing. Surveillance logs from the Guardia Nacional tell the same story. In January 2026, a boat was seized off Cozumel, loaded with party drugs, and headed for Puerto Morelos. In March, another skiff landed at Tulum, its cargo destined for a string of beach parties. Each time, the route shifted, the faces changed, but the business model held. Bar owners in Cancun told field researchers they saw no disruption in supply after Danone's arrest. If anything, deliveries became smaller and more frequent, designed to slip past police sweeps. The product was never in short supply, and the price did not spike. The franchise kept its promise, uninterrupted service, no matter who gets taken off the board. This is the logic that makes the CJNG brand so powerful. The Delta Cell is not a rogue gang. It is a local branch, operating under contract, backed by the cartel's capital and logistics. The small boats running between the islands and the mainland are just one spoke in a wheel that includes shell companies, crypto payments, and a network of corrupt officials who look the other way at midnight landings. When a manager falls, the brand stays, the supply routes flex, and the profits keep rolling in. The franchise model delivers what the kingpin strategy cannot disrupt: resilience by design, not by accident. In Quintana Roo, the party never stops, it just changes hands. At dawn in the hills above Uruapan, the avocado groves stretch for miles, their fruit bound for kitchens in Los Angeles and Tokyo. But for every truck that leaves Michoacan, there is a hidden cost, one that does not appear on any export ledger. In this region, the price of doing business is set by Ramon L.R., Juan Alvarez, and his crew, Los Cannabis. Their racket is simple and brutal. Pay a 15% levy on every kilo harvested, or risk losing your crop, your land, or your life. Growers describe the collection as a tax with no receipts. Armed men arrive at packing houses, clipboards in hand, and tally up the day's haul. The math is non-negotiable. If a farm ships out $100,000 worth of avocados, $15,000 is owed to the cartel by sundown. Some pay in cash, others wire funds through shell companies with names like Agroservicios Maya or Frutas Selectas, all registered to ghost addresses. The money flows up the chain, routed through CJNG's central finance hub in Jalisco, then split among the 5 corporate services: capital advance, chemical supply, logistics, brand enforcement, and most importantly here, corruption protection. The Ministry of Agriculture's 2025 report puts the economic fallout in black and white. Between 2022 and 2025, avocado export volumes from Michoacan dropped by as much as $2 billion. American buyers pulled contracts, citing security risks. Farms closed, workers fled. The region's most lucrative legal crop, once a ticket out of poverty, became a liability overnight. The extortion did not just bleed the farmers, it bled the entire local economy. But the real insulation for CJNG is not just the threat of violence. It is the corruption service built into the franchise. In November 2022, Ramon Alvarez walked free from federal prison after a so-called judicial error, a move that local journalists and government officials privately called a payoff, not a mistake. Within weeks, he was back on his old turf, visiting farms, meeting with lieutenants, and re-establishing the payment routes. The message was clear: the courts could not or would not hold him. For growers, the law offered no protection. The only authority that mattered were the blue and white CJNG insignia. Attempts to resist have been met with swift public consequences. In August 2025, the municipal mayor of Tancitaro, a town known as the avocado capital of the world, was shot dead after refusing to authorize payments from the town's cooperative. The killing was not just a warning to other officials. It was an announcement that the franchise contract would be enforced by any means necessary. Within days, a new mayor took office and the payments resumed. For Los Cannabis, extortion is not chaos. It is a business line, governed by contracts and enforced with the same discipline as any multinational. When a plaza boss is arrested or killed, the next in line steps up, inheriting the payment lists, the contacts, and the encrypted chats with finance managers in Guadalajara. The brand stays, the levy remains, and the cash keeps flowing, regardless of who is in charge. The franchise model means the machine never stops, even when the faces change. For Michoacan's farmers, the cost is measured in more than lost income. It is the fear that hangs over every harvest, the knowledge that the law is just another service bought in and sold. The CJNG's extortion racket, shielded by corrupt officials and fueled by a corporate-style franchise agreement, has turned the region's green gold into a revenue stream for a criminal empire that does not need a king to rule. A single cartel boss falls, and the world expects chaos. But in the shadow of the death of El Mencho, the CJNG machine kept humming because the real power never sat in one chair. Instead, it lives in 5 corporate pillars, each one visible in the stories from Tamaulipas, Quintana Roo, and Michoacan. In Tamaulipas, Cesar, El Primito Morfin's oil theft network, ran like a black market energy company. His crew siphoned crude, bribed Pemex insiders, and shipped barrels north, all under the protection of a contract with the central CJNG finance hub. The capital pillar was not just a pool of dirty money. It was a service line, advancing funds for bribes, laundering profits through shell companies, and wiring royalties back to Jalisco. When the U.S. Treasury froze accounts tied to the Jensen family in Houston, the flow did not stop. Another front stepped in. Corruption was not a side effect. It was a built-in feature, a service sold to franchisees so the pumps kept running. The paperwork stayed clean, and the police looked the other way. Along the Caribbean coast, the Delta's cell in Quintana Roo showed how smuggling infrastructure and brand power combine. After El Danone was arrested, the network barely missed a beat. Fast boats still ran micro-routes from Isla Mujeres to the beach clubs of Playa del Carmen. Each shipment branded with the blue and white CJNG insignia. The product, cocaine, MDMA, fentanyl, moved on a schedule as reliable as any legal supply chain. The Deltas did not need to know the new boss. They needed access to the logistics service and the right to use the CJNG name. The brand was more than a threat. It was a promise of protection, a guarantee that buyers and sellers would keep doing business no matter who got arrested. In the highlands of Michoacan, Ramon L. R1 Alvarez and Los Cannabis enforced the CJNG extortion market with a ruthless efficiency that only a franchise could deliver. Farmers paid a fixed percentage of every avocado crop, funneled through shell companies and encrypted chats. When Alvarez was released from prison after a judicial error, it was not luck, it was corruption as a service, part of the franchise package. Even after plaza bosses were killed or arrested, the extortion lists, payment routes, and brand identity remained. The next manager stepped in, the contracts stayed, and the cash kept flowing to the central hub. Across these cases, the pillars are not abstract. They are the gears that turn every day. Capital, precursor supply, smuggling routes, brand, and corruption are not just perks for insiders. They are the services that regional operators buy, sell, and depend on. The franchise model means that when one node falls, another takes its place. The contracts outlive the faces. The CJNG survives not because it is untouchable, but because it is built to be replaced, rebuilt, and rerouted at every level. The kingpin strategy targets a person. The franchise model is a system, and the system endures. For decades, policymakers believed that removing a single kingpin would bring down the criminal enterprise. But the Jalisco New Generation Cartel has shown that targeting individuals is no longer enough. The real power lies in the service nodes, the financial, logistical, and technological backbone that keeps the network running, even as faces change. Agencies on both sides of the border are shifting strategy. Instead of chasing the next cartel boss, United States and Mexican officials are drafting proposals that focus on the 5 corporate pillars: capital, precursor supply, smuggling infrastructure, brand, and corruption. The aim is to treat the cartel not as a mafia family, but as a multinational service provider. financial operations are under new scrutiny. The Drug Enforcement Administration and the Securities and Exchange Commission now share intelligence to follow money trails through cryptocurrency exchanges and shell companies. The 2025 indictment of a former Drug Enforcement Administration finance official accused of laundering $12 million for CJNG illustrates that the weak link is often not the kingpin, but the accountant or the crypto broker moving illicit funds from Los Angeles to Puerto Vallarta condos. By tracing drug proceeds into legitimate businesses, joint operations can freeze assets and cut off the capital fueling the franchise model. Customs enforcement is also evolving. At major ports like Manzanillo and Veracruz, artificial intelligence-driven analytics scan shipping manifests for suspicious patterns. Every container of N-phenyl-2-pyrrolidone, or 4-OANPPP, the chemical building blocks of synthetic drugs, generates a digital fingerprint. When a shell company flagged by the Office of Foreign Assets Control files a bill of lading, the system cross-references it against entities linked to CJNG. The objective is not to seize one large shipment, but to make the entire supply chain radioactive, one flagged HS code at a time. A breakthrough may come from changing the law itself. Inside the Treasury Department and Congress, a coalition is pushing for an amendment to the Foreign Narcotics Kingpin Act. The proposal is to sanction not just kingpins, but franchise service entities, logistics firms, chemical importers, and crypto exchanges that form the cartel's backbone, regardless of where their owners reside. With this amendment, the Treasury could freeze the assets of a shipping company in Veracruz or a consulting firm in Guadalajara the moment it is linked to cartel operations. The legal language is already in draft form, offering enforcement agencies a scalpel instead of a sledgehammer. Mexican law enforcement is retooling as well. Regional intelligence fusion centers are being established to track oil theft anomalies, irregular Pemex contracts, and sudden shifts in extortion payments. These centers merge data from local police, federal agencies, and private firms, aiming to spot trouble early and coordinate rapid response teams that can target a franchise node from multiple angles: financial, cyber, and tactical. The old playbook, target the boss, wait for chaos, has failed. The new doctrine is clear: disrupt the nodes, dismantle the services, and treat the cartel as a network of profit centers. In the age of the franchise cartel, the real fight is for control of the corporate machinery that survives any single name. Tonight, the franchise model Mencho built outlives its founder. While policy still chases the myth of the kingpin, the real engine, networks of capital, chemical supply, and corruption keeps running. In 2024, U.S. agencies seized over $1.2 billion in CJNG assets, yet the flow of meth and fentanyl only accelerated. The question is not who inherits the throne. It is how you dismantle a business when the boss is just a brand. Tell me what you think below.